All right, good afternoon, learners. This is Mr. Freeman here again. It's grade 11 IT, Tuesday, 26th of May, and we are hopefully finishing off this topic where we're going to implement, or we have been implementing functions by using validation in the functions. And this is the third lesson. So we started on Friday where I discussed validation and what it is and the different types, and referenced a little bit of verification and so on, and discussed the differences. And then we eventually started yesterday, late in the lesson, with our little Delphi project where we're going to implement all these functions. Right, so just to recap from Friday, and obviously going on to yesterday's lesson, we discussed what validation is, as I said, and the four different types that we looked at were the presence check. In other words, is data actually added into your edit or not? The data type check, that is just to check if the data type, in other words, string, integer, etc., if that is typed in, what is expected is actually typed in. If I'm expecting a string, did you type a string? If I'm expecting an integer, did you type an integer, and so on. And then the range check to check if a certain range of, let's call it, integers have been selected. Like my example that I used is for grade. So if you have to enter grade as an integer into an edit, I'm expecting you to enter something in the range of 1 to 12. Now those three, the presence check, the data check, and the range check, they are often used together to check different things, and we can easily code them in their own little functions and have a button call each one of these functions in their turn. Because remember, one of the rules of a function is it should ideally only do one thing, so that you can reuse it when you need it again on a different button or a different edit. And then the final ones, the checksum, that stands a little bit on its own. That is if I wanted to check a certain number, and the example that we're going to use is the ID number of South Africa, and to check that every single digit was entered correctly. Or let me rephrase that a bit, that a single mistake wasn't made. Either I forgot to enter that digit in my ID number, or maybe I swapped two adjacent numbers around accidentally, or I duplicated a number. So maybe I tapped on 2 twice very, very quickly. And the checksum uses the last digit in my number, and it compares the last digit with a basic algorithm that I apply on the other digits. And that algorithm gives me a single digit answer. And if that single digit answer correlates with the final digit, then I know everything, or I'm 99.99% sure that the number that was intended to be entered was actually correct. Okay, so those are all validation techniques. And so we're just going to carry on. So we ended off with the Loon algorithm, and that's actually the next exercise or little activity, little function that we'll be doing now, is to implement this Loon algorithm. Just a quick recap is what I do is I take the odd positions except for the final position, because remember that final position is your check digit. We're not going to include that in our algorithm. We're going to compare it at the end. So we take every other odd position number, and what do we add with it? What do? We add them together, and we store that in A, for instance. And then we take the even numbered digits and we concatenate them. And what I said yesterday is you sort of join them together. You're not adding them mathematically, you're adding them, see it as you adding some strings together. And then after I've added them, we multiply it by 2, and then we take the individual digits of this multiplied result and we add those digits together. Then that gives me an answer in C. I then take C and I plus that with my answer in A, I get to D. And then finally, we say, take D, do mod 10, in other words, divide 10 into D. The remainder I subtract from 10, and that is my digit that I will be comparing with my 13th digit at the end. So quite a lot of stuff, but that's what we'll be doing after that. And here was just an example as I showed yesterday. And my answer was 8. So there's my odd numbered positions that I added. I got 16. B was just to join the even numbered ones in there. I multiplied it by 2. I got a bigger number. And then I took each one of those numbers and in our explanation, and we added them together to get 26 in this scenario. The 26 plus the 16 of A is 42. And the 42 modulus 10 gives me 2. Why? Because if I divide 10 into 42, I can divide 10 into 40, but what's the remainder is 2. So that's the 2 over there. 10 minus 2 is 2. Oh, sorry, 10 minus 2 is 8. My apologies. And that 8 is compared with the final digit over here. And if they correlate, then we know that in all likelihood, this was entered correctly, in sequence, no swapping, everything is fine. So I've gone through the ID number where we've said, okay, ID number is 13 digits. The first 6 digits is the birth date. When were you born? In the format year, then month, then day. The next 4 digits, that's assigned to gender. So females get the first 4,000, well, the first 5,000, hey? From 0 to 4999, that's 5,000 possibilities. And males go from 5,000 to 9999. So they also have their 5,000. So we'll do a bit of a check on that as well. And then the next digit shows whether you're a South African citizen born with a 0 in South Africa, and 1, you've became a permanent resident. So you've immigrated into the country. And the last digit is that checksum digit that I've just explained with the Loon algorithm. Okay, so now at this point, we then continue on page 151. I'm actually going to go there right now. And we've opened yesterday the Validate Info project in chapter 6. I will share that link to you again if you still need to download them. And we started off and we finished the very first question, which was quite simple. It said there, create a function called isNotEmpty to receive an ID number as a parameter, obviously, and then it returns a false if that string is empty. There's nothing in that string. Otherwise, if there is something in there, we don't know yet what, but if there's at least one character, we return true. So it's a basic function. So in my code, if I can quickly go there, we've declared our function over here in the private section. Why in the private section again? Because we will only be calling this function from inside this form or class or unit. Okay, if I needed to call it from another form, which you don't know how to do yet, because that's grade 12 work, object orientation, etc., then I would be placing it in public. But for now, grade 11, we're happy to put it in here. So what did we say? We declared it as a function, so we have to type the keyword function first. And then we have to give the name, and they say, we got to say is not empty. So our question is not empty. So if it's not empty, we want to return a true. If it's empty, a false. So that's the Boolean there at the end. So that is the type of value that the function will return. So I do colon at the end and the data type. That data type can be anything you can think of. But this is one very simple one. It's just going to be Boolean, true or false. And if my function requires additional information, if it doesn't have the information it requires within its body of code, or if it cannot find it somewhere as a global variable somewhere else, then you need to give it that information. And it doesn't have the ID, so we pass the ID as a parameter, as a form of a string type. Now, I know we say is ID, but at this stage, we're not checking if it's an ID, we're just checking if there was something typed in there. So I then went, after I've declared it over here, we did the Control-Shift-C shortcut, and that created this part over here in my implementation part. So it added the class name to the front, dot is not empty. You can type this out yourself, but why waste the time? Just use Control-Shift-C and it creates it for you. If it doesn't do that, it means that there's a problem with your syntax over here. Maybe you forgot to put this semicolon. Maybe you didn't do that colon over here. If it's a function, it needs to return something. Maybe you forgot to return something. So just then double check everything that it is correct, and you fix your mistake and you try again with Control-Shift-C until it works and it creates this. So what did we do? I created a variable called B is not empty. Boolean is not empty. I just emulated the name of my function, and I had one simple if statement in my entire function. Yes, you can break it down into more statements, but it is possible to do it like that if it is simple as this. So I said if length of SID equals 0. In other words, there's nothing in that string over there. If it's 0, then my return is false. Else, if there is a length, so in other words, somebody did type something in that variable, then my return is true. And I think that over here is answering that first question. So I'm going to move on to the new work, and that's that crazy long, complicated Loon algorithm. Not really that complicated if we just break it down into steps, but let's see if I do this correctly. So it says here, create a function, calculate checksum. So I'm going to copy that so long. A function called calculate checksum. I'm going to go back to my code where I declare, and I'm going to start by saying function calculate checksum. Okay. Eventually, it's going to return something. Now let's read on to see what that something is. Well, let's see here. It says to receive an ID number. So there's my parameter again. I need to code in an ID number. So let's stop right there and go back. And before my colon, before my return type, I say, I'm just going to call it SID again of type string. I can call it SID again. Why? Because this is not a duplication, because this SID only lives within that function. By the time I exit that function, this SID is destroyed. So I'm more than happy, more than allowed to create SID in this one here again. Okay, you're going to have some issues when you start declaring this as a global variable as well. Some languages will treat it differently, but always be on the safe side. Okay, so that is that part. I'm passing an SID. But let's carry on. To receive an ID number, we've just covered that, and calculate and return the checksum digit. So this is not going to be a true or false. We have to return the actual digit, the 8 or the 5 or whatever. And then we read on. Always finish the sentence as, for some weird reason, a string. But okay, I'm just going to follow what they ask me to do. So I know I'm going to return what type? A string type in this case. So now I can finish my function, say the return type is string, and I do my semicolon. If this is all correct, I can proceed to go Control-Shift-C, and yes, it is. It's created my implementation of my function. Okay, so now we can proceed with the actual logic of this function. Okay, so receive an ID number and calculate and return the checksum digit as a string. And we're going to follow the Loon algorithm. So I'm just going to scroll up and I'm going to follow this step by step again. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my variable names as the A, B, C, D, and Z, and so on. But I'm going to add my S if I'm working with a string, or an I in front if I'm working with an integer, and so on. So I need to sum the odd positions of these digits. So my idea that I have here is I want to loop through the entire SID, one character at a time, right? And I want to add them only if they are in odd positions. I can do that with a simple if statement to check if this integer that I'm working with right now, if I apply modulus 2 to that, okay, modulus 2, then if it's an even number, I will get an answer of 0. If it's an odd number, I will get an answer of 1. Let me explain. If my number is 6, okay, so we're dealing here with single digit values every single time, because as I said, I'm looping through every digit of my ID. But this can be applied to multiple digits. But okay, so let's say my example is 6 and I apply 6 modulus 2. What's my answer going to be? Well, I take the 6 divided by the 2 and I ask, is there a remainder? If there's a remainder, I get the value of the remainder. If there's no remainder, I get 0. So 6 modulus 2, 6 divided by 2, 2 can go into 6 3 times. Is there a remainder? No, there's not. So my answer is 0. So if I apply my digit, modulus 2, and I get a 0, I know it's an even position. However, if my value was a 7, and I apply that, now when I say 7, I'm not talking about the position 7. I'm saying if there's a 7, let's say I was born in July. So if that is a 7, July being the 7th month, and I apply modulus 2, I'm going to get an answer of 1. Why? Because 7 divided by 2, 2 goes into 7 3 times. What's the remainder? 1. Okay, so every odd position would get an answer of 1. I don't want to loop through the entire ID number because I want to exclude the 13th position. So I'm going to go and loop from 1 to the length of the string minus 1. Okay, so let's try that first. I'm going to say 4. Okay, I'm going to start at 1 because that will be the first character of my string. And I'm going to go all the way to length of SID, which I'm expecting to be 13, minus 1 to make it 12. So that's the first part. Okay, and that created, because I entered there, it created, maybe I must just make it SID so that it works. And to begin. Okay, so that's, I'm looping now through, well, I'm going to loop 12 times. So I want to now get my digit every single time. And because I'm going to apply modulus on this, this is a mathematical function, I want that digit as an integer. Okay, so I'm going to say here, I digit. No, not there, apologies. There, I digit. Okay. I wonder, do I? Yeah, let's keep it that way. Let's keep it that way. And I wonder if it's even necessary. Let's try and do it without it first and see if it's possible. So what was my question? I'm saying if what? So I want to say if SID at position I modulus 2 is 1, then I know it is an odd number. But SID at position something is going to give me a character, so I just need to string to int that first. So I'm going to say if str to int, okay, SID, the character of the string at position I. Okay, so now I've got that character. as a string. What am I doing with it? I want to say if that mod 2 equals 1, then I know it is an odd number. Okay, so my first character would have been perhaps well, character. Ooh, hold on here. Hold on here. What am I doing? I want the position. I don't want the value of this number. I'm talking nonsense here, guys. Sorry. What I'm doing now is if my ID number was 880101 and so on, what is Mr. Freeman doing now? Mr. Freeman is getting the 8. I don't want to see if the 8 is odd or even. I want to see if its position is odd or even. So really, I apologize about that. I was just, I don't know, carried on my own way. I don't want the 8. I want its position. So I'm saying if I, simple. If I mod 2 equals 1. Okay, so 1 mod 2, that's going to give me an answer of 1. Apologies, but at least now you know both methods. So what do I want to do if the position is odd? My first position is going to be odd. I want to take the actual value of that position and I want to add it to something. And that's going to be, let's call it my A. So I'm going to say A, okay? And perhaps over here, initialize IA with 0. Why? Because I want to keep on adding the value that is in the position of my ID to IA. So firstly, I'm just going to say make it 0. Okay, so if I mod 2 equals 1, what do I want to do? I want to say again end. I'm going to say IA becomes whatever was in IA plus. Now I don't want the position. Now I want the actual value that's in the position, the 8. So now I can say string to int. What was it? SID at position I. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't confuse you. So over there, I'm just checking 1, 2, 3 all the way to 12. Okay, so if 1 is odd, take that digit that is at position 1 of SID and add it mathematically to IA. Okay, so let's just go back and recap here. So they say here, so A, the sum of the odd position digits, okay, must be added together. But now let's look at B. B, I want to concatenate all the even positions. So I guess what I can do here is I can bring in an else here. Right? So if it's not odd, then it's even. What do I want to do there? I want to concatenate it. So now I'm adding, so my B at this stage is not going to be an integer. My B is going to be a string because I'm adding to a string. So that's going to be of type string. Okay, and for each even numbered position from 2 to 12, so that's fine, we would be able to handle that. I'm going to say SB, but I need to initialize that first. So I'm going to say SB is going to be an empty string at the beginning. Okay, so that's how I'm going to initialize my string SB. I'm going to say SB becomes SB and add to that final digit as a character on its own. That's fine. I'm now not going to be converting it to an integer. So I'm saying that. Right? So for every odd one, I'm summing, and for every even one, I'm just joining to the string. So let's go back, always go back. So let's just see, did I cover this? The sum of the odd positions and excluding 13? Yes, by the end of this loop, I would have my value A. Then B, the concatenation of the even position digits, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. That, according to me, would have been done at that stage. So A and B, at which point? After my for loop, would have been done. So now that where my cursor is right now, that is where I am, and I have a value for A and I have a value for B. Okay, so let's move on to C. Now, C says the sum of the digits of B times 2. So there's actually two calculations here. So let's obviously do B times 2 first. The problem that I have with B times 2 at the moment is that B is currently a string. I can't take a string and multiply it by 2. I need to convert it to an integer first. Okay, so I'm going to have over here an IB2 as well, and after my for loop, I'm going to convert SB into an integer and store it in IB. So I'm going to say IB becomes, now this time it's string to int, okay, and what am I doing? SB I'm converting. Okay, so now I've got IB, and I think we can carry on by multiplying that by 2 over here, because we got to take B, multiply it by 2. And now I can sum every one of those digits again. So how am I going to sum those? Okay, so now I've got B times 2 as an integer. Now I want to sum every single one of those digits. So now it looks like, again, I'm going to have to take some sort of C string and convert this answer into the C string so that I can now loop through C's digits one at a time and add them together. Quite a lot of stuff here. So I'm going to say SC now. And I'm going to say SC becomes the result of this into IB converted to a string. And I'm going to use this as a variation on the into string. You can also just apply the to string on any integer, and that would make it a string. So now at least I've got my SC over here. So if I go back here, this is, I think, let's look at the examples as well. What have I done? I've added A together to get an answer. I've then joined every single one of B. Okay, at this point over there, I've joined them. Then I multiplied that answer by 2, which is what I've done over here, but I had to change it into an int in order for the calculation to work. That's my answer there. Now I've got to go and sum these digits. So I've got to extract again every single character out of there. Okay, now this time it's all the characters. Again, I'm going to just for loop through the length of this and add every single one of these digits one at a time to another one. Let's call it IC this time. Okay, so let's loop. Okay, for I1, this time it's the length of SC, the entire one. Okay, and I want to now add each one of those digits to an integer. So I'm going to make that IC. Okay, I hope this makes sense at this point. And I want IC to exactly the same as IA, initialize that to 0, because it's the same thing that I'll be doing. This time I don't have an if statement. I'm just going to take every single one of those characters. I'm going to say, right, IC becomes whatever IC is currently plus the next digit. Okay, so and that would be the digit at position I of SC, again converted to an int so that I can do the maths. So I'm going to say string to int of what? SC, the character at position I again. Okay, so I've got IC is IC plus the string of I again. So what I've been effectively done here, as I said, okay, take the 1 plus the 6 plus the 2 plus the 6 and so on in a loop. So IC was 0, and then it was 1, and then the next time it was 7, and then 9, and so on, so that by the time I finish my loop, I have an answer of 26. I think most of the complicated stuff we have now done already. Okay, so the next one, D, 42. What was that again? Let's go up. It says D is A plus C. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and say ID. Guys, you don't have to use millions of variables, but I'm just using it to keep the order so that it makes sense. So after my for loop, okay, which is over there, I want to say ID becomes IA plus IC. Okay, so that's that part. And then lastly, Z. So Z is 10 minus my answer in D modulus 10. So I want to see what D modulus 10 is. That answer I'm going to subtract from 10. So yet another variable, I'm going to call that IZ. So after this, let's say IZ becomes 10 minus, I'm going to put this in brackets now because that needs to be done first, and I forgot about the minus. So what is that little calculation? D mod 10. And so that's ID in my case, modulus 10. So the 26 plus the 16 was 42 in D. I then applied 42 modulus 10. My answer was the 2, and I subtracted that from the 10, and there's my answer in Z. And that, by the way, is, I think, what we are supposed to return. But currently, Z is an integer. So when we return this, so result becomes, I can't just say IZ because I'm returning a string. I'm going to simply say IZ dot toString. Now I've done that. Hope that made sense at any level, and that made any questions at this stage. I had a question earlier about whether this can be implemented in the PATS, and absolutely do that. And the more I look at this, the more I think that because I've got a for loop and then an if statement in there and more for loops, I would definitely consider this very, very close to a complex piece of code. And if it doesn't qualify, at least you'll get a lot of marks for your algorithm and planning in there. Okay, let's look at the next question. I think we've done with this. Create a function called isValidID to receive an ID number and return true if the ID number is valid. Otherwise, return false if it, an ID number is valid. If we'll get through that in a second. Let's just first define our function. So function is valid, again receives the ID number, and it's going to return true, so it's going to return a Boolean. So I'm going to go up to the top here, add another function, and it's called isValidID. Again, I'm going to need my ID as a parameter, as additional information, and I'm going to return it as a Boolean. Okie dokes. And Control-Shift-C. And let's carry on. So an ID number is valid. In other words, I will return true if, now all of these things, not just one, all of them. if it is 13 characters in length, that's the first criteria, as well as all the characters must be digits. And lastly, the calculated checksum digit is equal to the last digit in the ID number. So we're going to have to call the calculate checksum function from within isValidID. And are we allowed to do that? Of course we're allowed to do that. You can call a method from another method, or in this case, a function from another function. We've even touched on recursion a couple of days ago, where a method calls itself. So let's start over here. I think my thought process is going to be the following. I'm going to say, make it assume that this ID that's passed is valid. So I'm going to make some Boolean is valid true. And the moment I can prove otherwise, the moment any one of these checks are false, then I change it to false and return false. We return our answer and we are done. So I'm going to do these checks one at a time. To try and do this in a big if statement with lots of ands and lots of flags, it just confuses everything. So I'm going to start off by creating my variable, and I'm going to call it is valid. That's the question, is valid, and of type Boolean. Okay. First thing, is it 13 characters in length? Right, so I would have loved to actually create a function that checks that, but okay, let's carry on with this calculation. So I'm going to say if and I'm going to say length of SID. If it's not 30, then what? I'm going to say if it's not, let's say is valid becomes false. Now you could stop your if statement there and carry on with the rest, but I'm going to say else if. And the reason why is my else if would only carry on if it was true. Why should I carry on if I've already proven a false over here? You can do it with 3 separate ifs, but if the ID is not 30, let's say it's 12, why waste processing to do the other checks? I know it's a lazy programmer's way by just creating 3 separate ifs, but if you think about it, the structure is much more efficient if we can say else with it. So I'm going to say else and if. What am I asking? No, not else if necessarily. I'm just going to go else. I need to do that at this stage. Else what? All the characters are digits. So now I've got to loop through every single character in my ID and check if they are in the range 0 to 9. So I'm going to say else begin over here. Okay, and I'm going to loop for I from 1 to my SID's length. I'm going to check every single character of them. So it's length of SID. And I suspect I'm going to do a few things over here. And why did my I not get created? Let's do it right now. So I of type integer. Now that should be fine. Okay, so I'm looping through every single one. All the characters are digits. So my question is if, okay, the digit, so, well, I'm going to keep it as a character because you can actually use the in for characters. So I'm going to say SID at position I. Okay, if that character at position I is in my range 0 to 9. Can't remember if I've got to do the square brackets, but we'll see if we have to leave that out in a second. So currently I'm saying if this character at position I is in the range 0 to 9. So if it is any one of those characters, then what? Well, nothing really. We don't want to check. We want to check if it's not in that range. So I'm going to put all of this, I'm going to add a not to the front. So if it's not 0 to 9, if it's anything else, then what? Then I'm going to say is valid, again, is false. And I'm going to carry on over there. So I've now checked if it's false. What if it's not false? I'm going to remove that over there and say else. Okay, so if it's not false, we're going to carry on. What's the last check? So the calculated checksum digit must be equal to the last digit of the ID number. So remember my checksum, okay, calculate checksum is going to return a string. And I want to check if that equals the last digit. So I'm going to get that as a character. So that should be fine. Okay, so I'm saying if, what's my question? Well, I'm going to call my function now, guys. So this is where I'm going to start calling my other function. And what's my function called? Where is it? Why can't I find it now? Well, the easiest way is, if I can't find it, go to calculate checksum, hold in control, and it creates this hyperlink, and you can click it, and there it is. Okay, so I'm going to call calculate checksum. So if calculate checksum, and what is my parameter? Remember, we got to give it a an ID to check, and my ID to check remains SID over here. Okay. Could have been another name, but that is what it is. So this thing is now returning a string. It can't have a string on its own in if statement, and that's why it's moaning like that. So we're going to say if that is equal to, but yes, if that is equal to my final digit. So what is my final digit? That's going to be SID at position 13. I know that it's set. I'm expecting it to be 13 characters. So I'm saying if this final one is that, then I say is valid. Oh, if they are the same, then it's valid, eh? So not an equals, but if they, can we apply that on a string? Probably not. Probably not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to build in, currently this is a string over here, although it's one digit, that is a character. So to be absolutely safe, I'm going to say that character at position 1. Okay, if they are the same, then I'm happy. But if they're not the same, then is valid becomes false. Okay, so I just want to check out here what's going on. So there's my if. It's false, else. Oh, there's a problem there. Else. Begin for that. If not, oh, this is inside the loop. So I probably have to end this off in any case. So I can't really do this at this stage. I'm going to copy all of this out, and I'll explain what I'm doing and why it won't work. I'll have to give an extra if over here because I can't now start doing this inside my loop. So So let's just check again. I said, if length is not 13, then false. Else, begin for every single character. If any of those characters are not 0, then make it false. And then we have to end. Unless, what if I bring this statement, bump it up a little bit? If I say, okay, if the length is not 13, false. Else, if the checksum is not correct, false. Else, and then let's see if there's character. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. So I'm saying, if the length is not 13, false. Else, if the check digits are not the same, false. Else. Okay, just indent that a little bit. The length is not 13, false. If the checksum is not correct, the same, false. Else, for every single digit in there, if as soon as I get a digit that's not between 0 and 9 or not in that 0 and 9, then it is false. It's a pity I can't think of a way to exit this the moment, because what if my second digit in my ID number was already something else? But you know what? That's not the end of the world. So I feel that this is probably the shortest way that, well, I can think of at this stage to organize my function. So let's just carry on here. We said if it is 13 characters in length, if it's not, it's false. If they're not all digits, it's false. And if the calculated checksum digit is not equal to this ID number, then it's false as well. Okay, and I've called that calculate checksum digit, and I've returned all of that in here. So now all I need to do, finally, is return my Boolean. And it's going to be result is valid. Okay, so question, could you go SID, length of ID, if you didn't know the length? Absolutely, yes. Yes, you can. So I'm going to just do that and copy that. The question is if I didn't know the length, could I have done this? Wow. Could I have done just the length of SID? Hey, let's go back to my code. Oh, but I think I've done that. Scott, could you go SID, length of SID, if you didn't know the length? Now, where did I not? Oh, there. You mean there. Okay, so you're saying SID at position, length of SID. Absolutely. So length of SID is going to give me a 13. So if I say length of SID, I understand you correctly, that would also work. Okay. Yes, we're building in over here if it was not 13 characters. But because I'm making a valid SA valid ID and I'm expecting it to be that, then I probably just be fine with putting the 13. But if you made a function that could check for anything, IMEI numbers, whatever needs to be passed on this, then absolutely you go length of SID. Guys, I didn't see the time. It is 16:49. I think we've done most of it except for this very final piece over here, where we're actually going to tomorrow quickly call my button on my enter ID over here and do a little bit of string manipulation. That's going to take us about 5 to 10 minutes maximum, and then we will carry on with the next work. And I think what I'm going to do, the final thing is, after that, I'm going to do another quite large activity so we just understand everything about functions and procedures. I'm actually going to find and dig in one of my past papers and see if we can't do that in a sort of simulate an exam scenario. Okay, guys. I hope that made sense. I hope this you'll join us tomorrow so we can finish this and look at a past paper.